The operation only lasted a couple of years, due in main to the 1929 crash, which knocked the price of silver down to a level that it soon became not economic to mine.
Welcome to our next episode of DD on the Go. On today's episode, we are visiting Dolly Varden Silver's silver camp here in northern BC.
Here we see a good illustration of a $30 million capital investment that was gambled upon and lost. Went into production in 1968 or 69, operated for 5 or 6 years, found they couldn't make a profit and were forced to close.
In today's episode, we are going to get into the deep history of the Golden Triangle, some of these operations that used to be in production and what that used to look like, as well as what a company like Dolly Varden needs to do to expand their resource enough to get their asset package back into production.
You have to gamble, and mining has always been a gamble and still is.
That was Ian McLeod, former mayor of Stewart, a local miner and the father of Dolly Varden director Rob McLeod. Mining, particularly in the Golden Triangle of BC, has always been a cycle of boom and bust. Nowhere is that fact more evident than in Alice Arm, which is at the southern tip of the triangle. Once a bustling town with upwards of 400 inhabitants, it's one of North America's newest ghost towns, having been reduced to 2 residents during the off-season. Charlie, a camp manager for Dolly Varden, and his wife and 2 dogs who live there year-round.
In the wintertime, after camp shuts down and all the summer people are gone, everything you can see in every direction is mine.
But it hasn't always been that way. Like much of the triangle, this micro-region has been the subject of boom and bust for the last century. 100 years ago, just a few miles away along the coastline, you could find Anyox, a bustling town that features the largest smelter in the British Empire.
Anyox, British Columbia. There isn't anything here now, Ian, except ruins.
No, there isn't, but at one time there were an awful lot of people and a lot of industry.
For Jay and myself, this is where our story in the Golden Triangle begins. After a day of visiting Dolly Varden CEO Shawn Khunkhun in Vancouver, we found ourselves in a helicopter, flying out of Terrace, BC.
We've landed in Terrace, BC.
Our first destination on a whirlwind trip, Anyox, where all that remains today is the ruins of what once was the lifeblood for so many in the region.
We're here in what used to be a thriving old town called Anyox, where there would have been over 2,000 people living here prior to the Great Depression. And we're inside what used to be the power plant that helped give all the power to the smelter so that Dolly Varden back in the 1920s could bring their ore here and turn it into dory barks.
Like so much in the world at the time, the Great Depression effectively spelled the end for Anyox, with the town abandoned in the 1930s, and its remains picked apart by scavengers before Mother Nature, through fire and life, reclaimed the area as her own. From Anyox, we flew to Kitsault, which sits across the water from Alice Arm. There's no other way to describe Kitsault than as an oddity in the history books. Flying over this town, it felt as if we were transported to a time several decades back. Constructed in the late 1970s in advance of a molybdenum mine that was expected to operate for decades, the town saw life for just 18 months before the price of molybdenum cratered, rendering the mine unprofitable, leading to its closure. But yet the town, with its shopping mall, bowling alley, and numerous houses, hasn't fallen to disrepair. 2 decades ago, it was acquired by a businessman who is believed to have spent over $20 million maintaining the private town for some unknown reason. The Moly mine site, meanwhile, is again being considered for production now that the price of the metal has improved, with studies said to currently be ongoing, proving that the boom and bust cycle lives on.
You have to gamble, and mining has always been a gamble and still is.
Next, we landed at our final destination, Alice Arm, British Columbia. Population, Dolly Varden's exploration team, and a couple of bozos with some cameras. Alice Arm can be best described as a company town. Well, they may not own all the land in the area. The town's population swells every spring as a result of the extensive exploration conducted in the region by Dolly. That exploration is centered on assets that have their own history of boom and bust. Just north of Alice Arm is where Dolly's claims begin, including the historic Dolly Varden mine, which after being financed by future President Herbert Hoover, saw production at the turn of the 20th century, when it produced silver at an average grade of 1,100 grams per ton. Slightly further north, you can find the Torbrit deposit, which saw production of 18 million ounces of silver in the 1950s. In fact, back when production was well underway, Alice Arm was used as a point of tidewater access for those assets.
What we're standing on here is a former rail bed that goes for kilometers and kilometers, all the way from Dolly Varden's exploration camp here to their various properties just north of here.
But today, it's the location of Dolly Varden's exploration camp, and our home for 2 days as we explore the region. Let's take a step back here for a minute to give you the big picture. What we'll call the current version of Dolly Varden began to take hold in 2020, when CEO Shawn Khunkhun, as well as director and geologist Rob McLeod, stepped on with the company.
The history that I inherited was the richest silver mine in the British Empire, Canada's third largest silver mine, and my strategy was to try to find other deposits. You know, there wasn't just Dolly, there was Torbrit, there was Wolf, there was North Star. And so the strategy, the idea was, could we build upon the rich history with the fact that the glaciers have receded, metal prices are significantly higher, and there's been tremendous infrastructure improvements that has made this area a very, very low-cost area to explore now.
Dolly Varden's flagship asset, the Kitsault Valley project, is now a combination of two major projects. The original Dolly Varden project that consists of the historic past-producing Dolly Varden and Torbrit mines, and the Homestake Ridge project, which they acquired from Fury Gold in 2021 for $50 million in cash and stock. With the acquisition of Homestake, the Kitsault Valley project grew to 163 square kilometers in size, while covering 15 kilometers of strike length from the Dolly Varden deposit through to Homestake, Maine. Dolly Varden currently believes that a new deposit exists every 1,400 meters along the way.
Is look, I could have went in 4 years ago, went into Torbrit and started mining. You know, there's a big, high-grade, potentially amenable to bulk mining ore body there that we could have started mining 4 years ago. But instead, the vision and the business model was, could we dare to try to have 100 million ounces of silver here?
To Shawn's credit, the company has driven hard towards that target since his time stepping into the role. In 2020, the year he stepped on as CEO, the company drilled 11,400 meters. Then they stepped on the gas, culminating in 51,000 meters being drilled just last year, which is an incredible figure for a small cap issuer. All told, including the estimated figures from this year, Dolly Varden has drilled approximately 142,000 meters since Shawn took the helm, with the goal of maximizing ounces in the ground. And it's paying off. As of a March 2023 43101 technical report, the company has amassed 137 million silver equivalent ounces in the ground. And here's the thing. That estimate doesn't really include much of the 142,000 meters of drilling done since Shawn stepped on. It was basically an amalgamation of the Dolly Varden and Homestake Ridge resources, meaning it's possible that there's a heck of a lot more silver there. And the stock has experienced quite the lift as well, up over 300% since the day Shawn was announced as CEO to today. And they're not slowing down just yet. In fact, we got to see a first-hand glimpse of what a drill program at this scale looks like. So we dropped off our bags at our tents, grabbed a quick bite to eat from a home-cooked meal at the camp kitchen, and loaded into the chopper to go see some drilling in action. What has become a normal commute to employees on site, to an outsider, was simply breathtaking. We quickly found ourselves flying among the treetops of untouched wilderness as our pilot swung us around through the mountaintops. As a special treat for us, we took the long way around to site, flying over the Cambrian ice field in the process, which covers a portion of Dolly's claims. From here, we landed at one of the several drill pads that were in use, where Dolly's crews are operating around the clock in a race against the coming winter. This particular pad we landed at had been constructed just days before, with 2 holes planned to be drilled from it at different angles.
The company is drilling 24/7 this summer. That means that even at 3 in the morning, there are drillers over at the drill site who are working at putting holes in the ground.
For those who have never seen a drill rig operate, which was both Jay and myself before this trip, the process is pretty straightforward, like many things in mining. Basically, a fancy drill bit is attached to a section of pipe. That pipe is then placed into a machine that rotates it as it bores into the ground using hydraulics. It goes down in 3-meter increments, after which the pipe is pulled up and the rock, referred to as core, that is in the pipe is removed and placed into a box and labeled. Then another 3-meter section of pipe is attached to the rig, and the process repeats until the desired depth is reached. At the end of the shift, the core boxes are loaded into a crate, and a helicopter comes, attaches a chain to the crate, and flies it back to the camp, where the core will be processed. The second part of the drilling process is, again, pretty basic. The core is received and labeled. Then geologists pour over the core to highlight noteworthy mineralization that they see. Before the core is split, analyzed again, and half of it is packaged and sent off for assaying at the lab to ultimately see what type of treasure that core may hold. It's simple in theory, but it's dramatically more labor intensive than it sounds. Well, the data collected is used to constantly update models of what is under the ground. And all this labor and analysis requires a ringleader, which is where Rob, our tour guide and VP of Exploration for Dolly Varden, comes in, along with his on-site right-hand man, Tony Carteri. We managed to find some time for a sit-down with Rob during our travels, who it turns out has quite a simple methodology to finding these big deposits.
The most basic techniques, and still techniques that work the best, is prospecting, just getting out there, and you can have all the remote sensing equipment and satellites looking at everything, but in the end, it's boots on the ground is what we say. That's where you're going to find stuff.
Those simple methods work. It's what's led to the discoveries here in the Triangle for over a century. But Rob's also a believer that the modern tech that's been developed can be super valuable to assist in finding new, massive deposits that likely exist and are yet to be found in the area.
The systems are really big. And if it's buried under 10 or 50 meters of unaltered rock, you're not going to see it on surface. So there's just so much area that hasn't been explored yet. Obviously the low-hanging fruit like KSM and even Dolly Varden, the vein where it comes to surface, that was all discovered 100 years ago. The easy stuff has been found, but with this sort of new technology, exploration techniques, geophysics, things like that, we still have a very good chance of finding other very large deposits.
And say what you will about the methods, but they're working. Shortly after the return from our trip, core that we saw on site was assayed, and it showed an intersection of over 1,000 grams per ton silver over 9 meters in a directional drill hole at the Wolf deposit. Daughter holes off that same vertical section also intersected over 650 grams per ton silver over 21 meters, and over 500 grams per ton silver over 27 meters. What's directional drilling? We asked Rob that same question.
You to drill several holes off of what we call a mother hole. So you drill your first hole, and then you back your string out, your drill rods, and then you put this instrument on, and then it basically curves off of that hole. So then you get what you call daughter holes. And it saves us a lot of time and money, because that first 300 to 500 meters that we drilled through the sediment cap in our case, we don't have to re-drill that. We go back down and we just turn off of that. And so we can do 4 or 5 holes off the same mother hole and get a number of intercepts on the vein at depth. So
those results were so significant that Dolly Varden was able to raise over $32 million off those assays after our trip was concluded. Even more significantly, famed mining financier Eric Sprott participated in the offering, investing a further $2 million into the company and acting as the lead order for the funding round, increasing his stake to 9.8%. Why did he invest more money into Dolly? Well, he's a big believer in the silver thesis. He explained his thesis behind the metal in a recent interview he did with TF Metals.
Well, today for me, the thing that I find frustrating the most on a macro picture is the lack of performance of silver. There's already this physical shortage every year. What last year was 250 million ounces in a billion-ounce market. And no, in fact, the mining market's about 800 million. The billion is some recycling going on in there, okay? So to have a 20% shortage and somehow not manifest itself in the real world is really quite shocking. And then more recently, of course, we have this Samsung announcement that they have this solid state battery that features silver that consumes 20 ounces of silver for every car that's produced. So I think it's a tremendous development, and it's going to affect more than cars, obviously, anything that needs any electricity whatsoever. Oh, and by the way, The estimates are that they'd need 500 million ounces a year. We mine 800. Where are we going to get another 500 from? We're already 200 short now.
As you likely guessed, the funds raised from that financing are going to be put back into the ground. Shawn has already expanded the drill program for this year by 7,000 meters, bumping meters drilled this year from 25,000 meters to 32,000, all in an effort to add more ounces to their asset base.
When Shawn first walked into Dolly Varden Silver, his goal was to get to 100 million ounces of silver equivalent. Now he finds himself at 140 million ounces of silver equivalent, and he feels like he's just hitting his stride. One trend that we've noticed in 2024 is that whenever we cover silver, we're getting huge views on our website over at thedeepdive.ca, but also whenever we cover Dolly Varden Silver, we get huge views. This is a story that has resonated with retail shareholders, and we're really excited to be able to get to tell it. I think that one thing that a lot of us think about when we think about exploration is that it's just three guys walking around in a bush smashing rocks. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Dolly Varden Silver is spending $15 million on their exploration program this year alone. One of the things that we've learned on this site visit is that to really expand a resource once you get to be Dolly Varden size is expensive. The amount of people here, the amount of just infrastructure on the camp, we're talking they've got chefs, they've got cleaners, they've got a camp manager, they've got people just sitting in the helicopter facility waiting to take more people out. It's huge. It's expensive, and it's something that as an investor, you've got to be aware of because these things aren't cheap.
Now, I'll make a quick correction on that last clip. The price tag for this summer's exploration program has increased, given that the program jumped by 7,000 meters in size since we were on the ground. But the premise stays the same. It costs big dollars to explore, but the payback, particularly when you're hitting mineralization such as Dolly is, can be very much worth it. And that's especially true when you have a resource the size of Dolly, plenty of exploration and discoveries since your last resource update, and a macro environment that is driving the price of silver higher. For reference, the price of silver has climbed from the low 20s to the low 30s in the roughly 18 months since the company published their last technical report. We spent less than 48 hours on site in northern British Columbia, in what I would describe as some of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen. The part you can't help but walk away and think is, how did people used to come up here over a century ago and mine? In a remote area where it's freezing cold with limited technology at their disposal. But it was lucrative enough then that people did it. That's what a great commodity bull market does. Now, obviously, I don't know if Dolly's ever going to make it back into production. I suppose in the right silver environment, anything can happen. And when it does, the entire Golden Triangle could look like it did hundreds of years ago. I suspect that Dolly Varden will again be a producer. But in the words of Ian McLeod, the father of director Rob, you have to gamble, and mining always has been a gamble and still is.
You have to gamble, and mining has always been a gamble and still is.
If you ask me, guys like Eric Sprott know exactly what they're betting on. This is one of the biggest undeveloped silver packages in the world, and it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense in a $50 silver environment, which feels like it could be right around the corner. I gotta say I'm really grateful that Shawn had us over to the property right as silver's moving, and I can't help but think that Dolly Varden's gonna quickly become one of the most interesting and watched stories in all of mining.